So you're in there.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Melissa Graves. I'm a professor at the Citadel, and welcome to day 2 of the Watergate break-in 50 years later. It is my great pleasure this morning to welcome John Mindermann, former FBI special agent, Paul Magallanes, also a former FBI special agent. And in just a second, we're going to also see that Judy Hoback is here. And she was a bookkeeper and accountant for CREEP. Hi, Judy. Good morning.
Hi.
All
Hi,
right.
Melissa.
It's great to see everybody. Thank you for being here. And let's get started, shall we? So, Paul, let's start with you. Set the stage for us. Tell us about the FBI in 1972.
There was a lot of things going on in 1972. I mean, you had in Washington, you had all these protesters against the Vietnam War. You had them all over the streets. At one point, even had the military out there. I can recall coming from my residence in Virginia over the bridge and lined up against the railings were all military people, all of them with, military arms and looking very stern and just looking for trouble. The protesters, of course, we came in early. The protesters were nowhere to be seen at that time. But then later on during the day, they were out there protesting. It was a kind of a surreal scene when you went out to the street, which of course we did. During that time, it was also hectic for the FBI because Director Hoover had just died. In fact, he died on May 2nd, 1972. And so the Bureau at that time, all field offices were speculating as to who was going to be the director, and you couldn't understand how the man had died. I mean, everybody thought he was God. God
Right.
doesn't die, but he did. At
Can I
any
ask,
rate, there was all kinds of speculation as to leadership, as to who was going to be the boss and all of the rest. I think it was like the second day or something to that event that President Nixon appointed L. Patrick Gray as a director. And he immediately went out and made statements to the troops and said various things about what we're going to do, what we're going to be looking forward to. One of the main topics for agents at that time was, hey, can we wear colored shirts? And that was one of the main topics that he talked about. Yeah, now you can wear blue shirts, yellow shirts, or whatever.
Because under Hoover, you could only wear like a white shirt and a dark tie, right?
Correct. And so we were all supposed to be looking like executives. Well, we all look like executives, whether it's blue shirt or any other color shirt, so long as it wasn't very ostentatious, you see. And I mean, no purple shirts were allowed and things of that nature. So that was the main thing that quieted the troops at that time. Hey, you can wear color shirts. You can wear a mustache type of thing. So that's what was happening in the field and in the Bureau. The Bureau must have been very hectic because they had a new boss, and the nobody with any experience in law enforcement and a new guy to be trained, I guess, by the leadership of the FBI. I was, of course, assigned to the Washington field office, and we would get all kinds of back and forths from headquarters to the field, and rumors and all kinds of things. And it was hectic, but at the same time, it was kind of like a lot of fun. I think
Awesome.
John can
Yeah,
add
a lot
something
of
to this
fun.
too.
I hear that from a lot of agents. It seems like their time in the bureau, they always recall so fondly. John, I was going to ask you, can you tell us, what was the mood like in the FBI after Hoover passed away? Because he had been director for 48 years. This was a really big deal.
It was huge because you had this super dominant figure who had been in power for over 40 years and created this organization and defined it and ran it in its own particular image. So we felt this really deep vacuum, and no one felt that they were situated in any way a secure position. Mm-hmm. I think the thing that gave me a feeling of some security in the FBI was my fellow agents. The thing that I noticed about the FBI, I had been in about 3 or 4 years at the time Watergate broke, was no matter where I worked, the agents themselves had a variety of backgrounds. So when we came together on a case, you had perspectives which really, really helped, because yours was only one of several or many. And since you had men from all over the United States, different educational backgrounds, different perspectives, different religions, different educational organizations, you had this marvelous kind of coalition of opinions and perspectives. So it was very difficult, if you were working with 4 or 5 or 6 other agents, to make a serious mistake or to involve yourself in a tactic or a strategy which was not going to be productive. And the other thing that I noticed about it was I really enjoyed working in Washington, D.C. It simply was a beautiful city. There was a lot going on there. And my duties and the duties of the squad Paul and I were assigned to, we were assigned to criminal squad number 2, C2. So it was called miscellaneous crimes. It was unlike the other squads who were bank robbery, Soviet foreign counterintelligence, maybe Chinese foreign counterintelligence. Other squads had clear, limited definitions. Ours was miscellaneous crimes, which meant we were literally kind of the sweepers of Washington, D.C. We went everywhere. We worked every kind of a crime. So we had to be very, very versatile. And at the same time the Watergate was going on, each and every one of us had our own individual caseloads and duties that we had to keep going and we had to keep investigating. So we had multiple duties in terms of other cases, and each one of us had specific other duties. Perhaps maybe you were on a SWAT team or you were a firearms instructor. So you had duties that obligated you to the whole FBI division of 365 or 70 agents. So you had a really wide spectrum of what you did. Watergate came to dominate that, but it was only a part of what we did.
Great. That's very insightful. And I'm glad that you brought up C2, John, because I like to think of C2 as, and I don't mean this like, this isn't meant to be an insult, because I've worked in places where we've classified ourselves as sort of the island of misfit toys, where you just kind of, everything just kind of fits together, but it's just kind of, it's very random. And I think that's what's so interesting about this, is that Watergate ends up going to, a part of WFO where you guys just do everything. I find that fascinating. Judy, tell us about you. Tell us about the committee to reelect the president. What were you doing in 1972?
Well, I came to the committee the finance committee to reelect the president in October of 71. And there was only about 18 of us at the time. It was very, very small part. And we were the arm of the CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President. And my job was general bookkeeping. I made the deposits every day from fundraising. We were the fundraising arm and kept track of the money and the money in and the money out. And we also were responsible for doing the financial reports quarterly to the Government Accounting Office, which was a requirement. And it was a small, fun group. We were pretty closely knit. And of course, we were by the middle of 72. Now we'd geared up and we had quite a few people working there. But that was basically my job, just general accounting and bookkeeping.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I want to ask, and this is a question for all three of you, and I hope that we can hear from each of you. Tell me, how did you learn about Watergate?
Maybe I'll start off. I learned about Watergate by getting a phone call on June 17th at about 3:45 in the afternoon. I was taking a shower at the time, and my wife yelled at me, "John, it's the office." I said, "Well, tell him that I'll call him right back. I'm in the middle of a shower. I'll be out in a couple of minutes." So about maybe 10 or 15 seconds went by, and she shouted at me, "Get out of the shower now. They want to talk to you immediately." So I got out of the shower very annoyed, and I'm dripping wet standing there. And I have a phone in my hand. I'm a little concerned about an electrical charge with all the water dripping off me stark naked. And there's this very annoyed voice on the other end of the line. And it said, "Mindermann?" And I said, "Yes, John Mindermann. Get in here immediately. Mr. Rule says you're to come in immediately and pick up Mike King along the way. And you're to go to the Metropolitan Police and you're to investigate some money that they've taken involving a burglary at the Watergate." Well, where in the Metropolitan Police? And they told me the detail. And I went and I picked up the agent. And I'm reflecting on the basic information they gave me over the phone. And it was that there were men apprehended in the Democratic National Headquarters with bugs on them, and there was money on a bed in a room where the FBI executed a search warrant with the police. That money had been confiscated. That was what I was to investigate with Mike King at headquarters. And the men taken into custody, one was identified as a former FBI agent and currently involved with the CIA, and the others were identified as Cubans from Miami who had been involved in the Bay of Pigs. And my immediate reaction was, standing there stark naked, dripping wet, my immediate reaction was, this is no ordinary burglary. I had come in the FBI from 8 years experience as a police officer in San Francisco. So I had been involved in all kinds of crime as a night patrol officer all over San Francisco. So I was very familiar with burglars and burglaries. And I said, this is no ordinary burglary. This is a political year, presidential election coming up, and later, and the Democratic National Headquarters, whatever that was. And we have FBI involved, CIA involved, Cubans involved. I said, this is CIA operation, flat out. This is CIA operation. So that was my opinion coming into the case en route to the Metropolitan Police. So that's how I got notified.
Great, thank you. Paul?
Well, the Watergate case, as John said, started like on a weekend. And of course, we're all out of the office then. But when we got back on Monday, everything was chaos type of thing in the squad. And because what John alluded to earlier was that this is not your regular burglary. And it turns out that it wasn't. And so as I recall, the case was assigned to Angelo Lano, and he became the case agent. He became the manager for the case. He became the man who assigned all of the leads to other agents, and in short, organized the entire Watergate case. In fact, I like to look at it as Lano being the maestro or conductor of a symphony, and we, the working agents, were his instruments. And as it turned out, we created a really, really good, majestic symphony. But he, and I'm talking about Angelo, was a man who directed not only all of the leads, but he himself was very intelligent, very analytical, and a no-nonsense agent. He went against some of the later on when we were stymied by the FBI leadership in terms of not conducting investigation that was logical to conduct. He backed us and went all the way to the top to get things done. And so he was just a no-nonsense type of agent and supported us. And as I said, he overrode FBI orders. And so as far as I was concerned, or I am concerned, he assigned various leads to me in terms of interviews at Creep and at other locations. And I became then involved with not only the interviews, but also follow-ups, and which leads me to, of course, Judy. But one of the leads was that I was going to interview a bright young lady by the name of Penny Gleason. And it came down to us that we could not interview anyone at the White House or at Creep without a White House lawyer. And we had to schedule the interviews, which was, far different from what and how we operated. The FBI does not operate that way. The FBI goes to a subject's home, office, or wherever location they're at, and simply interviews. Hi, Paul Magallanes, here's my credentials. I want to interview you for such and such. Well, we couldn't do that with the Watergate. We were just stymied. And we had to wait sometimes a couple of weeks before we got to the interviews that were important, that we thought were important, that Lano thought was important. But in my first opportunity with Penny Gleason, there was a lawyer present. She admitted nothing. She said nothing at all. In fact, later on, we found out that she was told by the Creep people not to say anything and don't implicate anybody and things of that nature. And she didn't. Mm-hmm. So we got absolutely nothing from her, nada. And we left it at that. And, we walked away and said, okay, there's another interview that was not fruitful at all. And so the next day, she calls me and says, hey, Paul, I really have some really good information to tell you, but I couldn't expose anybody or expose myself yesterday during the interview because I was afraid. Mm-hmm. Okay, she says, but I do want to give you the information. She says, but I have conditions. I said, okay, what are the conditions? And she said, listen, we have to meet in downtown Washington, D.C. I don't want to be anywhere near Creep or the White House. We have to meet in your personally owned vehicle. I don't want any bureau cars. And you pick another agent so that you can interview me. And we did. And, we were in my car and it's July and it's hot. And my car is overheating and all this. And I said, this is ridiculous, and we just can't be in this car, 2000 degrees, heat. And so I called the boss. I said, hey, boss, I told him what we had. She's given us all this information. And he said, go to the hotel room, what have you. And I said, okay. We did that and we debriefed her and it was like hours. At the end of the briefing, she says, and if you think I know something, and she did, she told us all about what happened at Creep after the burglary, how the files were being shredded by Liddy, how other people were just taking files out of the offices, looking at telephone logs and all kinds of stuff that they reacted to after these people were arrested. And so in addition to other items that she told us about, so she gave us some really good information and we thought, wow, we can go from here and build a case. And she says, well, if you think I know something, she says, I have a friend who's absolutely devastated by what happened here. And she's a person of integrity and she wants to talk, but she's afraid and all of the rest. And I said, well, who is this person? Well, I have to call her first and see if I could, and can we meet her? And she says, I'll have to call her first to see if she'll be amenable to being interviewed. And I said, okay. And so she's supposed to call me. We waited several days, didn't call me. And finally she called and she said, okay, she's willing to meet with you, but there are conditions, all these conditions. Okay. So what are the conditions? Well, she's got to trust you. And so she proposes that you meet before, for dinner, drinks, and she wants to kind of test you out, see if she can trust you, and before she says anything to you. So we went to the Key Bridge.
I'm going to pause you for just a second, Paul, because we're going to get back to this. This story is so good. But Judy, I want to shift to you for just a second because I have so many questions in my head right now. So let me ask you a few things. First off, when did you start to feel like maybe something was wrong at Creep?
I felt something was wrong almost immediately. I got a phone. I heard by the radio news on the morning of the 18th about the break-in, and for some reason I just had bad vibes right away, and I ended up calling my boss, Hugh Sloan, and his comments to me were, when you get to the office tomorrow, lock up the payroll information. Don't let anybody in there. And I thought, oh my goodness, And I guess it was at this point that Hugh knew that Jim McCord was one of the 5 people. And of course, Jim was our security man and he was on our payroll. And that's what they didn't want anybody to know. So that's how I started. So I almost immediately felt a connection and didn't know how far it went, but was concerned.
So when you went to the office on Monday, can you kind of set the scene for us? Was it a normal day in the office or was something different?
Not at all normal. There was a lot of whispering going around and most people didn't know too much about it, but there was a lot of chit chat, a lot of whispering. And I do remember my getting in, as I recall, Penny Gleason worked for Jim McCord. And that is why she had so much information. She was aware of so many things. And she and I talked right away, but it was sort of like in a whisper, hush, hush. We weren't talking to other people about it. But it was a little bit tense at the time, but not terribly. Business as usual with most people.
So when the FBI started sending its agents over to conduct interviews, were you interviewed during the course of those interviews that took place at CREEP?
I do not recall ever being interviewed by FBI agents there. I think my first talks were with Paul and John.
And so tell us how. We've heard from Paul that, Penny makes this offer. I have this friend, she'll talk to you. She has these conditions. Tell us, how did that come about?
Well, Penny talked to me and said that she had met with them and that she knew I could tell them, give them information from the finance part. And we talked back and forth. And finally I said, okay, I'll talk to them. But I was nervous. I was scared, but I was really thinking that if I talked to anybody, it would be the FBI, because I would pretty much trust that. So that's how it came about.
Was there ever a moment where you thought, I might have something to lose if I talk to the FBI? Were you ever worried about your job or anything like that?
I wasn't so much worried about my job. I certainly thought I might lose my job, but I wasn't, this was a temporary job for me anyway. And so the job part was not worrying me. What mostly worried me was we're talking government. I was just tense about telling anybody confidential information, which I had. And that really made me nervous.
So the condition that you put to, you need to trust the agents and you wanted to meet them for drinks or dinner. How'd you come up with that?
I don't remember how I came up with that, but I guess I feel like my whole life has been that way. If I meet somebody and get to talk to them, I get a gut feeling that it'll be fine. It'll be okay. So that's probably why I made those conditions, but I don't remember that at doing that at the time.
So in the moments leading up to, your dinner date at the Keystone Marriott with Paul and John, were you nervous? How did you feel?
Yeah, I was very nervous. As a matter of fact, I was nervous for probably 10 months after all this. I was nervous constantly. It was very, I felt like I had information that might be valuable. I was scared to talk to anybody about it. And I was certainly very nervous coming to talk with the FBI agents. But I also felt that if I was going to talk to anybody, they would be the ones I'd want to speak with.
So what was it that made you feel like, you're scared? I'd like to think that you're not the only person at CREEP that has information that would be useful to the FBI. Can you speculate what was different about you that made you actually go to the FBI and provide this information? Were you different? What compelled you to do this? This was a big decision.
It was a big decision, and I think pretty much most everybody else working there, with the exception of some individuals, did not want to be involved. Not my business. I'm staying out of it. And I remember talking with some of my friends saying, we've got to do something about it, that we have to say something. And but most people did not want to be involved. It was so that's probably why I was different there. And so was Penny. Penny was afraid, but she was determined also.
Did you have this strong sense of, what's happening here is wrong? Did you understand the extent to which CREEP was providing funds at that point?
I didn't know at the time, but I knew it was wrong.
Mhm.
I felt very much that at least Creep was involved in this break-in, and for whatever reason, I didn't understand any of that. But as soon as they had said they had found the money on the burglars,
Mhm.
I knew definitely it was our connection, because Hugh and I had counted out money numerous times to give to various people. So I knew the connection, and it really scared me. I wondered if it went to the White House, but I really had no idea it went that far.
Gosh, that kind of gives me, I'm sorry, that gives me chills to think about the implications of, what you're trying to wrap your head around at that time. I can't imagine. That's incredible. All right, so I want to go back to Paul and John. So set the scene for us. Let's talk about that evening at the Keystone Marriott.
Paul said to me almost in an offhand manner just before 5 o'clock on that very fateful day, he said, "John, can you give me a hand with an interview?" And I said, "Sure." So we were en route to get the Bureau car, and Paul was driving, and we headed through Washington. He said, "We're going to be going out to the Key Bridge Marriott, and we're going to be interviewing a couple of women associated with the the Republican effort to reelect the president, Creep." And he explained to me that there was some considerable tension and concern on the part of these women, and that I needed to be aware of that. And in effect, what we were going into in this interview situation in the Marriott, in a very casual, relaxed atmosphere, a cocktail lounge adjacent to a place where you'd have dinner, that we were being really evaluated as to whether or not we were going to be trustworthy and reliable to go forward with them in providing critical information. So this was really quite a lot of pressure, and we had a short amount of time to talk about what was doing. So I thought the most important thing for both of us was that we be authentic, we be ourselves, and that we not try and promote a certain image. So I merely just talked in a casual way and introduced myself, as did Paul, and we chit-chatted about normal things that people who had really never met before might chit-chat about in a lounge like that. And I think over time, maybe Judy and Penny sensed that we were authentic, that we were reliable, that we were men of our word, etc. And we progressed along those lines. I remember my biggest decision was to whether or not I was going to have an alcoholic drink or not, because I was concerned about drinking on duty. So I made the decision. I said, I really have to blend. I'm thinking I really have to blend in here. Mm-hmm. So I had a scotch and soda. It's the only time I ever drank on duty with the FBI. But I really kind of enjoyed that scotch and soda because the FBI would be paying for it. And also, since I was on duty, I thought, God, it's just like San Francisco and the police department there, occasionally drinking on duty. So I had a little personal experience there in that 45 minutes, but I actually think it kind of helped because it did relax me, and maybe it made me a little more authentic. I don't know.
Yeah. Paul, what do you
remember? John is correct about the drinking and stuff. That was a very unique situation. As I recall, and it's 50 years ago, and I tell people that Watergate is 50 years old, June 17th, and I'm still above ground. I can't believe that, but I just praise the Lord. But I can't recall whether, I think Judy did have a drink, right? And we were there with Penny as well. We had, and as I recall, we had dinner and drinks, didn't we? Judy?
I think we did, yes. I think we did.
Yeah, and the reason for that was because, we really wanted to talk about, our own lives and what was going personal things. Like we discovered that Judy was a single mom, and she had a daughter that she was taking care of, and we talked about our own families, and what we were trying to establish was rapport. And I think we did, because during all this time there was some bantering going back and forth, and some laughter, and so that of course appealed to Judy and Penny and John and I, and all of a sudden Judy says, "Okay, that's it. I trust you guys. Let's go to my place, and I'll tell you everything I know." And then that's what happened. We went to her home, and we interviewed her until the wee hours of the morning. And at which point she told us, wow. What she told us, like, for example, she dispersed all kinds of monies to G. Gordon Liddy for one. I recall about $89,000 she dispersed to Liddy on Hugh Sloan, who was her supervisor's request. And then she told us about all of this cash that was, we're talking in the millions of dollars that was in the safe. And she often wondered, what is this cash for? But then she soon found out. And so because of all of the information and detailed information that she was giving us, John and I immediately knew this is not a CIA operation. Because prior to that, let's see, we interviewed you, I think on July 18th, something around there, right? Wasn't it, Judy?
I think it was right around somewhere in the middle of July, yes.
Yeah. And so we were still on the premise that it was a CIA operation. Why? Because all the leads were coming back to CIA. E. Howard Hunt, all the Cubans were CIA operatives and stuff. So we thought it was all CIA. And Judy's information became paramount, because this is the first time we found out that, hey, this is not a CIA operation. This is actually an exceptional burglary that led all the way to the White House.
Judy, what do you recall of that evening? What sort of impression did John and Paul make on you?
Well, they soon made me very comfortable. I felt relaxed with them. I felt like I could really trust them. So it was, even though I was frightened, it was almost getting a load off my mind to be able to finally tell somebody, and that I could come forth with my concerns and my information. And I really was relieved once I was able to speak with them. So it was a good evening for me. It made me feel a lot better.
Yeah. And if I recall, you guys went back to Judy's house, is that right? And she briefed
Correct.
you well into the night.
Correct.
That's correct.
Yeah, the interview actually went till 3 a.m. and we exited with all this information and actually hovered a bit in front of Judy's house and discussed what to do at that time. And I said to Paul, Paul, I can type 85 words a minute. I said, let's go right back into the office while this is all fresh. And I said, I'll get on the typewriter, and you and I will work together, and we'll rough draft what we call a 302, which is an investigative insert that we have, a piece of paper, and we put all our information on that. And it took us till about maybe 9:30 in the morning before we had that complete enough to give it to a typist, who then actually put out the final copy, and it came up 19 single space pages, about 10:30, 10:15. And then at that point, we read what we had written, and it looked good. And so we went home at that time and turned in our 19-page single space report on what Judy had told us, which, as I recall, it was maybe the single biggest experience in my 20 years in the FBI, because what Judy had told us was just a complete layout of the finances of where the money went to whom and what the money was being used for, to the degree that she knew it and what we could kind of put together at that point. So it was a revelation. It was groundbreaking. It was going to give us some direction in this case, which we were struggling to find. And I might mention at this point, Paul alluded to it, and Judy certainly did, with the fears that she had. Well, we as agents had an awful lot of fears too, because we were operating in a very hostile, ill-defined internal environment. So we didn't know whether we had support at headquarters or whether we didn't. We didn't know who was supporting us, who wasn't. We had endured quite a bit at that point. So we were also a bit frightened and concerned. So we put, as I mentioned, we continued on with the interview, which was fantastic. And we got it down and we turned it in. And I think Paul and I went home and crashed at that point. And then we waited to see what would happen.
I want to talk about what happens about a month later, or maybe 2 months later. Eventually, Judy, the information that you gave to Paul and John shows up in a news article in the Washington Post that Woodward and Bernstein have written. Did you see that news post? Or I guess it would be not a post, it would be an article back then. Did you see the article?
Yes, I sure did. I saw the article, and I guess I could feel myself flush and red and very nervous at the time, because I knew that information had come from me. It said anonymous, but it was obviously me. And I really wasn't quite sure. I really didn't think that Paul or John would have released that, but I did think that maybe somebody had gotten a hold of that information in the government itself, and it had been leaked. Just as John just said, the FBI was a sort of in chaos itself, and I wasn't sure that maybe information that they had written of had leaked out through higher ups. And so, but that, yeah, I was really, really concerned then. But I still didn't. I didn't think it was John or Paul that had leaked it.
Sure, but you contacted Paul, isn't that right?
I did. I can't remember the time lapse, but one night when I was driving home from work, I felt as though I was being followed, and whether I was or not, I don't know, but the perception was that I was. So I was very, very scared. And I remember calling my babysitter and asking if she could keep my daughter overnight. I just didn't want to stop and bring her home. And of course, she said fine. So when I got to the house, I had Paul's card, and I remember calling him and talking to him on the phone and telling him what I suspected. And I really expected him to say, "Oh no, I'm sure everything's fine." But he didn't say that. He said, "Well, do you have some place where you could send your daughter?" And at that point, I went, "Oh my gosh, this is really for real." And that he's suggesting that maybe I should. So I said, "Well, yes, my brother and sister-in-law would be happy to take her." And in fact, she went to Pennsylvania to their house for a couple months. And it was a pretty big relief, but it was terribly, terribly frightening time for me.
Wow. Paul, do you recall that conversation?
I do. It was a harrowing experience for Judy. When she called, after she read the article, she was furious. I mean, furious. She said, "You said it was going to be confidential, and there it is, word for word, what I told you guys." And I said, "Judy, I don't know what happened, and I didn't know what happened. Um, I don't know how it got in the paper. I suspect that it came from the Department of Justice. I didn't suspect that it was coming from our own leadership, deep throat to the reporters." But she was furious. And at the same time, she was very, very concerned. And she asked, as I recall, she asked for protection. And I said, the FBI doesn't protect. We can't do this. I will have a police car, if you'd like, go by the house and stuff, but that's about the extent that we can do. And that's when I told her about her baby, and does she have a place to go and things of that nature. But she was very concerned, and rightfully so, when she called the first time. I trusted you guys, and this is what happened. So that's my recollection.
Mm-hmm. Judy, do you remember that anger that Paul described?
Oh yeah, I definitely was. I was upset about it, and then thought, I've probably done the wrong thing by talking, and now I'm going to be, and somebody will be following me for that's what I was concerned about, was following me, putting my life in danger, but putting my daughter's life in danger too. And maybe that was pushing the envelope a little bit, being that concerned. But as I said before, if you feel that way, it's your perception, and it's hard to talk it out of your head and say, "Oh no, that's okay," because it just was an enormously terrible time for several months in my life.
Yeah.
Well, she had reason to be concerned. And I'm talking specifically about characters, or if you will, all the president's men at this point were involved, and publicly involved. Like, for example, Magruder, John McCord, who directed the operation, G. Gordon Liddy, all the Cubans. And all this was leading up to the White House. John Ehrlichman and Bob Haldeman. And these were the two individuals who were the closest to the president. So she had reason to be concerned. I mean, if something nefarious was going to happen, they had all of the power to do that. Because when you're fighting, if you will, against the president and all his men, they have a lot of power. So she was not at all, I'm not at all surprised that she was concerned.
Absolutely. It's interesting to think about that cast of characters that you describe, Paul, and then to think on the other side is this young single mom who's the bookkeeper at Creep, but you're holding all the secrets. Judy, had the mood at Creep changed over the months as the investigation continued?
Oh yes, absolutely. Everybody was tight-lipped. Nobody had too much to talk to me about anymore at that point. It wasn't that I was being shunned or anything. but they were sort of afraid to be connected with me in any way. And I recall that I had this one friend, Evie, whose husband had been an advance man for President Nixon. So she knew a lot of these characters, and she had some feelings about a lot of these characters, which she was a godsend, because she gave me a lot of good advice about what not to do, where not to go. When we went down to the convention in Miami that summer, Evie and I were roommates together, and one of the first days out by the pool, here comes John Dean around to chit chat with me. I'd never met him before. And of course, Evie was right. She knew him, and he talked, and he was, really friendly. And, when we get back to Washington, if you got any concerns, just call me at the White House and I'll be happy to help you out. And just things like that. When we got back, my friend said, do not go over there. And she really saw it before I did, just because she knew so many people, that all he was doing was gathering information so that he could report back. And I to this day thank her for that advice, because I never did call him again.
Had you confided to anyone that you had informed the FBI on what you knew? Did anyone in your life know that about you?
Yes, I had neighbors 2 doors down that I were dear friends, and when my husband had passed away, they were really, really helpful with me and my baby daughter at the time. So I could talk to them. Jim, my neighbor, was an attorney, and so I just felt like I could speak with him and get some advice. And so I did confide in him. And then at some point, after I had been speaking a little bit, I got a call from a friend of mine who was an attorney, and he said, my partner and I have been reading some of this stuff, and we think you need an attorney, and we're it. And that was it. And he said, speak to nobody else. So that's how I got Bob for an attorney.
So,
but those are the only people I talked to.
So they had just been reading, what had they been reading that clued them into the fact that this?
They were reading reports in the newspaper, and then they read, and they knew I worked at the committee. This was a personal friend, so he knew I worked at the committee, and that's what just one day he just decided enough was enough. I needed to be represented.
Yeah. Absolutely. After that article came out, did you think that maybe people at CREEP suspected that you were the source?
Absolutely. I think they definitely did, because the tone really changed. And I was pretty much avoided by the plague, like a plague. And I am sure they thought I was the leak. Yes.
I have to excuse myself for a second.
Of course. John, can you set the scene for us in terms of how important it was, what it did to the overall FBI investigation, this information that Judy handed over? I mean, she wasn't just a good informant. This really was, as I understand it, a turning point for the investigation. Is that correct?
It was all of that. It not only was a turning point, but I've always seen it as even providing us with a bit of a foundation, because up until that point, we were struggling to try and get some definition, some momentum, some feeling that we were making some progress, because it was like shadow boxing in the dark. You couldn't see exactly where you were going, what you were doing. The assignment that I had and Paul had, which was to interview all of the employees over at CREEP, we were interviewing these employees, including people like Judy, in rooms that were very, very small, with a White House attorney hovering right over the interviewee, and Paul and I, who are not small guys, we're stuffed in there. So the four of us in every interview with this White House attorney, kind of a goon type attorney, hovering over the poor individual who's a clerk or a functionary in some form over there, is really being intimidated by these three men. So it was an atmosphere that was very, very not inducive at all to an interview. As Paul said, when we operate as agents, we pick where we're going to interview people. It could be at night. We could knock on their home, on their front door. We could, in effect, ambush them any place we chose to, so that the setting was going to be conducive in our mind to having maximum opportunity to get the information we needed and put the individual at ease. So we define that. In this particular case, it was defined for us, and it was very, very, very difficult for everybody. So that was the atmosphere we were working in. We were very confused and concerned about it. And there were these cross currents coming from all these different forces. So Judy's interview was more than pivotal. It was really groundbreaking in providing the direction that led us toward the White House with some competence, some direct evidence in the form of testimony, and something to give Leno and company, the individuals he was working most closely with, some ideas, I guess, for strategy and for tactics. Yeah. So it was a great interview. And Judy, of course, as in my mind, is one of the true American heroines that I've ever come into contact with. I mean, just phenomenal what she did to step forward and to provide this information under these kinds of circumstances, both professional and as she's defined them, personal, having this infant daughter to take care of on her own and so forth. So it was just a phenomenal experience, and it speaks, I think, to the American character. It really does.
Judy, I want to ask you about your interaction with Carl Bernstein, because at some point you come into contact with at least Carl Bernstein and maybe Bob Woodward. You'll have to fill me in on this. What happened, and how did that interaction come to be?
Yeah, I first interacted with Carl. He came to my house one evening, and my sister-in-law was over visiting with me, chit-chatting, and we were having some coffee. And here comes Carl to the door, and he said he was a reporter from the Washington Post. And I sort of put my foot in the door and said, I can't speak to you. No, I don't want to speak to you. I knew why he was coming. And my sister-in-law was enthralled by it all, and she sort of said hi, and next thing you know, Carl had his foot in the door and ended up coming in and sitting and talking. He was pushing me to try to tell him a lot of things, and I don't think I probably told him enough that he knew he wanted to come back and see me again. And my sister-in-law kept filling him with coffee, and he stayed longer, and they had cigarettes, the two of them. And it was just, he really wormed himself in, and he was quite delightful and nice. He wasn't, he was young. He was younger than I, and but he was pushy, but he was good. And made you feel sort of comfortable, but not quite. Knowing he was a reporter, I really didn't want to say too much. But as I recall, he and Bob both came back at some point later. I don't know if it was a week or 2 weeks or whatever. And I still was having a hard time speaking to them, but they sort of did this like, well, can you nod your head if it was this, or can you give me an initial if it was that? And that's basically how that interview went. But I did speak to them, nothing like what Paul or John, but
Mhm.
I gave them enough information, surely, that they were able to move forward.
Yeah, yeah. W- in the timeline, when did these interactions take place? Was this after the article had been published, which I think was in September, if I'm recalling correctly? So was it after that article had been published, or was it before?
I think it was before. I think they came out to see me in September.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it was before. So when that article got published, I was torn between did they, because they did say anonymous and all that, was it they that had done it? I'm not sure of the timeline, so I don't want to say for sure, but it was all around in the same time.
I see. Did you continue to talk to them, or was it just these two meetings?
I think I didn't talk to them after those 2 meetings. I think that was it.
I hear you. It's interesting to me that, you know, you've got the FBI on one hand trying to build its sources, and then you see Woodward and Bernstein cultivating the same sources, which was that was interesting to see when I was researching this. All right, I'm gonna get to a question from our audience. Um, Joseph Campbell said, "Please ask Judy about how she felt about her betrayal or her portrayal in the movie All the President's Men. Accurate? Exaggerated? What did you think?"
I thought that the portrayal was actually pretty good.
Mhm.
Uh, the Jane Alexander, I think, did a very good job. There was a story that said that she had talked with me before. I've never met her. That is not a true story. She figured it out from just, I guess, from Carl and Bob about
Mhm.
me. But I thought her portrayal was, it showed my nervousness, my edginess, and
Mhm.
I thought she was quite good,
Mhm. That's
quite true, quite true to my feelings. Yes.
okay. Great. Um, I want to shift back for a second to focus on the FBI again. We've talked about how tumultuous a time it was at the FBI. And Paul and John, you both have a really interesting story that you've come to refer to as the Saturday morning massacre. Um, can you tell us about that story and what happened that day?
There were
Yeah,
27 agents and bosses who were investigating and quote unquote directing the Watergate case on C2. We all got calls like on a Friday evening to meet the director at his office at 11 a.m. the next day.
Mhm.
And when I got the call, I thought, just me? He says, no, you and all the rest of the people that are working, the agents that are working the Watergate. So he says, but the agent in charge wants to see you all in his office before you go over to see the director. We went in there and he says, gentlemen, I don't know what this is about. And most of the time they do know because, the other bosses tell them and there's no secrets. But this time he claimed he didn't know what it was about. He says, I only have one suggestion. He says, do not embarrass me. Okay.
And this is Jack McDermott, correct, Paul?
No, this was Kunkel.
Okay. Okay.
What's his first name?
Bob, I think.
Robert Kunkel, correct.
Robert. Okay. All right.
And Robert Kunkel was a kind of a scaredy cat, if you will. He was by the book, and he didn't want any trouble. He didn't want anyone rocking the boat and that type of thing. And that's why he said it. So we all walked over to the Justice Department and FBI headquarters, and it was J. Edgar Hoover's office, and he had a conference room before you entered his private office. We all were gathered around the conference room waiting for the man to enter. And finally, after a few minutes, he entered, and still we didn't know what the heck we were doing there. And he came in and he says, "Gentlemen,
Who's he?
I got a call from Sandy Smith, Time Magazine." And he asked some very pertinent questions. And those questions and that information could only have come from you. Everybody looked around and what's going on here? He said, somebody in this room is leaking information to the press. And I want to know who that is. And I want that agent or those agents to come forward, put your credentials on the desk and your weapon, and admit it, in a sense. Nobody did, of course, because nobody was leaking from our side. And he then began to berate us in no uncertain terms. He said, "Gentlemen, I may not be the investigators you are." He says, "But I'll have you know that I was a commander on a submarine, and I held court-martials. And so I know what this is all about." And he then began to insult us, and he called us flap-mouthed, yellow-bellied agents. And he said, "If I find out who or those that leaked to the press, I'm going to fire you." And as he was saying this, I mean, he was enraged. His head was like the size of a pumpkin, if you will, and his veins in his neck were all sticking out. He was really red with anger. And he says, "You're dismissed." And, everybody just was frozen. They couldn't believe what they just heard. In fact, Robert Kunkel, to his credit, during this tirade, or before the tirade, tried to step forward and explain to us that, it wasn't us. He says, Are you one of the people that are leaking?" He says, "No, I'm not, sir." He says, "Step forward, step backwards." So he, at least to his credit, tried to support us in a way. But I have never been insulted in the way he insulted me. And I think I can speak for the other agents as well. We, as FBI agents, before we come in, are investigated backwards, sideways, up and down, every which way. They investigate our relatives, they investigate our friends, schools, everything. And here's a man who berated us, and then about a week later starts burning FBI files in his fireplace. Now, who is talking about integrity? If I saw him on the street, I would have spat in his face.
Paul's description was excellent as to exactly what happened. The only thing I'd like to chime in on here was that he really just lost complete control. And I kind of look back on the situation, and it was very much like sending some kind of a rocket into outer space, because when he started out, he grabbed the rostrum in front of him with the FBI seal on it, as we're all facing him around this oval table. There's 27 of us, about 12 on each side. And he grabs the rostrum and he leans forward. He's got this big head and this gray crew cut. None of us had ever met him. And he leans forward, he starts into this diatribe that Paul described. but his face turned crimson red. And when no one stepped forward to actually surrender their credentials and gun or cop out that they had actually provided information, which none of us had, Kunkel, the SAC, who was closer to him, tentatively stepped forward, and before Kunkel could say anything, Gray turns to him immediately to his left and he goes, "Mr. Kunkel, have you leaked information?" Because Gray demanded the agent who leaked information step forward. So Kunkel takes a step forward, probably to defend us. And Kunkel says, "No, sir, I haven't leaked any information." Gray says, "Then take one step back." So Kunkel takes one step back. And then we've gone through the liftoff. We're headed toward outer space here in the rocket. And he goes into more rockets kicking in to take us into orbit. And he lost complete control. He's rocking back and forth. The rostrum is actually moving and he's leaning forward. He's screaming. He said, "You will not fool me. I am a graduate of Georgetown Law School. I've conducted many investigations in the Navy. I will get to the bottom of this. I am a qualified investigator." Mr. Bates, who was the assistant director of the criminal division who was there, "Mr. Bates, have you got the name of every man in this room?" He says, "Yes, sir, I have." "Well, make sure that you have. And I'm telling you, men, if you ever come before me again, I will fire you." And I'm watching this whole thing and experiencing it. And I'm thinking, this is like Paul. This is unreal. This is from another planet. And then he yells, "Dismissed!" And he turns, he pivots, and he does an about face in a military style, and he marches out. And we're all standing there wondering, well, what the hell was this? And when we filed in, Bates, the assistant director, is standing there with a clipboard. We had to go by him and we had to give Bates our name, and he was checking us off as we came in, all 27 of us. And when I was going by him in line, I said, "Mindermann," he goes, Oh, you're from San Francisco. I was out there as SAC." And I go, "Well, yeah, Mr. Bates, I'm from San Francisco." And as I continued by him, I'm thinking, geez, he knows me. I'm thinking, oh no, he doesn't know me. This isn't good. He's reviewed my personnel file. That's how he knows I'm from San Francisco. Oh, we're in for it. So before we actually got positioned, I was very, very concerned. Up to that time, I'm kind of skating down Pennsylvania Avenue. You have to really catch this scene. Here's a Saturday morning, and here's 27 men dressed like Paul and I walking in mass down Pennsylvania Avenue, and there's a few tourists scattered around looking, well, who are these guys? So the whole situation in Watergate was kind of a series of scenes that were so real, surreal, and we experienced these. There were others.
It's interesting to think about the pressure that everyone was feeling in so many different ways. You're not getting help from creep leadership in your investigation. You are getting scolded by a director who, might I add, I think at that point when this meeting happens, he's been there about a month. So this is a very bold move to make very early into his tenure. And then, like Paul said, he's burning documents from E. Howard Hunt's safe in his free time. It's a really wild time. All right, I want to ask you some questions. The first is, Paul, this is for you. Can you tell us about your experience speaking to the Cuban burglars in jail after their arrests?
Yes. We thought that perhaps if an agent who speaks Spanish and was Hispanic would talk with the burglars, that perhaps they would be more amenable to talking with us and so on. So I traveled to the DC jail, which was a pit really, and interviewed each of the Cubans. And they were all very polite, respectful, acknowledged my role as an FBI agent. They were very forthright in what they said, but didn't offer any details of what they were doing at the Watergate. I asked them, I said, listen, we know obviously that you rented rooms in the Watergate. We know that you were arrested in the DNC offices, et cetera. I went through the litany of things that we knew already. Do you have anything to offer in your defense? Can you tell me what happened here? Who is the one that directed you? Who gave you these assignments? And we know that you are CIA operatives, and that you. This is to all of them, I told, and that you have worked for the CIA and all of the rest. And they said, well, thank you very much, Mr. Magallanes. And we're speaking in Spanish, by the way. And, pero yo no te puedo decir nada por la razón de que esta es una cosa, un caso oficial, un caso muy grave, un caso muy importante, meaning, hey, this is a big case, this is a very important case, but we can't tell you anything. And we respect you. So to a man, they said that. And then to a man, they also said to me, Mr. Magallanes, we're basically working for the same man, which, befuddled me. I didn't know exactly what they were talking about. And I said, explain that to me. And he said, all of them said, well, we are working for the country, the government, and we're all working for the president. And I said, well, as an FBI agent, I don't work for the president. I work for the Constitution. And so you're wrong in that regard. The one who was very affable, very outgoing, was the Cuban named Eugenio Martinez. He was kind of like very open, but he wouldn't say anything. And again, he said, we're going to be taken care of. Our families are going to be taken care of. And you know that. I said, no, I don't know that. Explain that to me, please. Well, he said, I can't say anymore. But it turns out that Martinez, we're talking, the burglary happened in 1972, June. He was pardoned by President Reagan in 1984. And he had worked and conducted over 300 CIA operations. The last one was not a CIA operation. It was a creep operation, actually. And it failed. Hardly anyone knows that the burglars did, in fact, or were successful in entering the DNC headquarters the month before in May, and they planted the bugs and they took copies of documents and so on. But what happened, of course, and it probably came up earlier yesterday in talking with other agents. But what happened was that one of the bugs wasn't working. They wanted more material, so they went back in, and what all happened? They failed the second time. So Martinez was a real, how can I say? He was an authentic CIA operative who knew what he was doing, except that he was working with some people who made very serious mistakes. And had they not made the mistakes, they would have been successful too the second time. But he was an interesting character.
Thank you, Paul. Judy, I have a couple of questions for you. The first is, can you tell us anything about Creep's attempts to hide Baldwin's employment with them? Did you know anything about that at the time? Al Baldwin's employment, or Creep might maybe trying to not let that be known?
At
No,
what time?
it-
Oh, it's sorry. Go ahead, Judy.
No, it was Jim McCord that they tried to hide that he was working for the committee to re-elect the president. And I was told to pull his payroll information out of the files, but it was Jim McCord that was the one that they were trying to conceal, that he
Okay,
was an employee. Yes.
great, thank you. And the second question is, do you know anything about the payments to Dorothy Hunt, E. Howard Hunt's wife?
Good question.
No, I know nothing about that. I have no idea about that.
Okay,
I'm assuming it must have come from another source.
sure. All right, well, thank you. Okay.
Well, you
I
know what
have,
happened on the payment type of thing. You had Liddy with about $89,000, and you had I can't remember his name. Judy, help me, or John, who had over $100,000 dispersed to him, and it might have come from these people, because I think Dorothy Hunt had $10,000, wasn't it?
Yes,
When the airplane crashed,
mhm,
which is very suspicious, by the way. But uh, so there were different committees. You had Creep, but you also had the finance committee to reelect the president, or you were, Judy. And then Creep was more political. They were not any kind of banking, accounting, or anything like that, as I understand it, Judy. Correct me if
that's
I'm wrong.
that's correct.
And
That's correct.
so what it might have come from different other committees.
all right, great, thank you. All right, I have a question from Philip Gilfus and Joseph Campbell. I'm going to combine their questions because they're asking about the same thing. Did you, Paul and John, ever have any dealings with Mark Felt during your investigations? And then what did you think about his involvement with the press when it was revealed in 2005?
I had I had some dealings with Phelps indirectly, and it had nothing to do with Watergate. I was an agent in Fort Worth, Texas, immediately out of the FBI Academy. I was a first office agent, and we surreptitiously had a secret room in our resident agency where we would gather and drink coffee and lock the front door. We were not in headquarters. We were in a subunit away from Dallas, Texas. And under Hoover, you couldn't drink coffee. So we had a little secret room where we gathered and made coffee and had a cup of coffee in the morning. And one morning, our clerk, James Vaughn White, came in and said, "Golly gee, have you heard what happened up in Oklahoma City?" And we said, "Well, we hadn't." He said, "Gee, the SAC up in Oklahoma City had gotten drunk at a National Academy function at Durant, Oklahoma, and got in an argument with the chief of police's wife and took his drink and poured it down the front of her dress. And that, of course, caused a brouhaha and a complaint from the chief of police to Director Hoover about this conduct." So what happened, according to the information that we received about Mark Felt at the time apparently was the chief inspector for the FBI. He was dispatched to investigate this with some aides, and they took affidavits from all of the attendees at this police function in which this event had occurred. And then Felt allegedly one morning at 9 a.m. marched into the SAC's office unannounced and fired the SAC without any warning whatsoever, and had him escorted out of the office forthwith. So Felt had a reputation, a ferocious reputation within the FBI as being Hoover's hitman. And he was apparently very, very, there was no feeling whatsoever of a second chance or anything like that. This man was fired at age 47, lost his pension, and was cashiered out of the FBI. So Felt had this reputation, and that was the way he was, from what I had been told.
He was known by the agents in the field as the White Rat. He was the hatchet man for Hoover. And he, as John alluded to earlier here, he hurt a lot of agents. I mean, unnecessarily. Instead of giving them a letter of censure or an admonishment of some sort, he fired him. And so he was pretty well hated in the Bureau by the agents. In terms of the Watergate, this man, by leaking to the press, placed witnesses in peril, like Judy, for one. He shredded the public's confidence in the FBI because it made us look like fools. And he was lauded by the press as a patriot because he was, quote unquote, a whistleblower. And if he hadn't done what he did in terms of leaking to the press, then the public would not have any knowledge of what happened. Well, that's not all true, because Woodward and Bernstein had other sources besides Deep Throat. And, he was, Felt was the number 2 man in the whole FBI. So after Hoover died, he was expected to be appointed director because he was number 2 man. That never happened, of course. And he was a bitter individual. I think that he was purposely trying to sabotage L. Patrick Gray so that he would not be confirmed by the Senate, and that he felt would then be appointed to director. It's something very interesting that came up in Woodward's book. And I'll read this because he said one line in there. He said, Watergate ranks as the single most successful use of the news media by an anonymous, unelected official with an agenda of his own. So Felt was not a hero. He was a bum.
Last question, and I'm hoping that we can answer this quickly because unfortunately we are out of time. This is from David Kaiser, and this is a question for Paul. When did you learn about the earlier successful Watergate entry?
I'm not really sure. I don't recall exactly, but it was, I think it was when John McCord, because none of the Cubans, McCord, Liddy, none of them would talk. But I think it was when John McCord wrote the letter to Judge Sirica before sentencing, and I can't recall the date, but it was 1973, as I recall. But I think that's when we found out.
Thank you. All right, Paul, John, Judy, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful, enlightening, enjoyable conversation. I loved hearing your stories. Thank you for sharing it today with our conference and our viewers. We appreciate you. And and you'll live forever in history for that one night at the Keystone Marriott, which is exciting. All right. Thank you, and we'll see you at the next session.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, everybody.